Text number 11. Canto 2, Chapter 3, Text 11. This is a nice verse that we can chant responsively. What happened here? Pages are stuck together. Okay. What's Shukadeva Goswami going to do as an encore from yesterday's verse? Because yesterday's verse is so important. This verse is something of a summary of all the other verses preceding it. Etāvān eva yajatām iha niḥśreyasodayaḥ bhagavaty acalo bhāvo bhāgavata-saṅgataḥ etāvān eva yajatām iha niḥśreyasodayaḥ bhagavaty acalo bhāvo bhagavata-saṅgataḥ. All the different kinds of worshippers of multidemigods can attain the highest perfectional benediction, which is spontaneous attraction, unflinchingly fixed upon the Supreme Personality of Godhead only by the association of pure devotees of the Lord. Important. 3-page purport. All living entities in different statuses of life within the material creation, beginning from the first demigod Brahma down to the small ant, are conditioned under the law of material nature or the external energy of the Supreme Lord. The living entity, in his pure state of conscious, his pure state, is conscious of the fact that he is part and parcel of the Lord. But when he is thrown into the material world on account of his desire to lord it over the material energy, he becomes conditioned by the 3 modes of material nature and thus struggles for existence for the highest benefit. This struggle for existence is something like following the will of the wisp under the spell of material enjoyment. All plans for material enjoyment, either by worship of different demigods as described in the previous verses of this chapter, or by modernized advancement of scientific knowledge without the help of God or demigod, are illusory only. For despite all such plans for happiness, the conditioned living being within the compass of material creation can never solve the problems of life, namely birth, death, old age, and disease. The history of the universe is full of such plan makers, and many kings and emperors come and go, leaving a plan-making story only. But the prime problems of life remain unsolved, despite all endeavors by such plan makers. Paragraph. Actually, human life is meant for making a solution to the problems of life. One can never solve such problems by satisfying the different demigods, by different modes of worship, or by so-called scientific advancement in knowledge without the help of God or the demigods. Apart from the gross materialists who care very little either for God or for the demigods, the Vedas recommend worship of different demigods for different benefits, and so the demigods are neither false nor imaginary. The demigods are as factual as we are, but they are much more powerful due to their being engaged in the direct service of the Lord in managing different departments in the universal government. The Bhagavad Gita affirms this, and the different planets of the demigods are mentioned there, including the one of the supreme demigod, Lord Brahma. The gross materialists do not believe in the existence of God or the demigods, nor do they believe in that different planets are dominated by different demigods, they are creating a great commotion about reaching the closest celestial bodies, Chandraloka or the moon. But even after much mechanical research, they have only very scanty information of this moon, and in spite of much false advertisement for selling land on the moon, the puffed up scientists or gross materialists cannot live there. And what to speak of reaching the other planets, which they are unable to even to count. However, the followers of the Vedas have a different method of acquiring knowledge. They accept the statements of the Vedic literatures as authority in toto, as we have already discussed in Canto 1, and therefore they have full and reasonable knowledge of God and demigods and of their different residential planets situated within the compass of the material world and beyond the limits of the material sky. The most authentic Vedic literature accepted by the great Indian acharyas like Shankara, Ramanuja, Madhva, Vishnu Swami, Nimbarka, and Chaitanya, and studied by all important personalities of the world is Bhagavad Gita, in which the worship of the demigods and their respective residential planets are mentioned. Bhagavad Gita 9.25 affirms, Yanti deva vrata devan pitrin yanti pitrin vrataha bhutani yanti bhuteja yanti mad yajino pimam. Translation. The worshippers of demigods reach the respective planets of the demigods, and the worshippers of forefathers reach the planets of the forefathers. The gross materialist remains in the different material planets, but the devotees of the Lord reach the kingdom of God. We also have information from the Bhagavad Gita that all the planets within the material world, including Brahmaloka, are but temporarily situated, and after a fixed period, they're all annihilated. Therefore, the demigods and their followers are all annihilated at the period of devastation. But one who reaches the kingdom of God gets a permanent share in eternal life. That is the verdict of Vedic literature. The worshippers of the demigods have one facility more than the unbelievers, due to their being convinced of the Vedic version, by which they can get information of the benefit of worshiping the Supreme Lord in the association of the devotees of the Lord. The gross materialist, however, without any faith in the Vedic version, remains eternally in darkness, driven by a false conviction on the basis of imperfect experimental knowledge or so-called material science, which can never reach into the realm of transcendental knowledge. Final paragraph. Therefore, unless the gross materialists or worshippers of the temporary demigods come in contact with the transcendentalists like the pure devotee of the Lord, their attempts are simply a waste of energy. Only by the grace of the divine personalities, the pure devotees of the Lord, can one achieve pure devotion, which is the highest perfection of human life. Only a pure devotee of the Lord can show one the right way of progressive life. Otherwise, both materialistic way of life, without any information of God or the demigods, and the life engaged in the worship of the demigods in pursuit of temporary material enjoyments, are different phases of phantasmagoria. They are nicely explained in Bhagavad Gita also, but the Bhagavad Gita can be understood in the association of pure devotees only, and not by the interpretations of politicians or dry philosophical speculators. Generally, in his purports, Prabhupada doesn't mention which politicians he's referring to, but sometimes in lectures he mentions their name. As if being a politician gives them some credential to speak their philosophy and call it Bhagavad Gita, or commentary on Bhagavad Gita. For those of us in the West, we've been spared from that noise. And those that are born in India maybe were subjected to that noise. Maybe not. So for such persons, or for followers of the worshippers of the demigods, there's hope, or the good news is the making available the association of pure devotees, or those representing pure devotees, to give pure bhakti, and then one can go the rest of the distance. One can become fully purified. The phrase in the verse is bhāgavata-saṅgataḥ. Bhāgavata-saṅgataḥ. The term bhagavata means in relation to Bhagavan. Just like the verse from Canto 1, Chapter 2. By rendering service to the bhagavata, meaning the book as well as the person, then the door to spiritual perfection is open. So, in relation to Bhagavan, that's the doorway, or the key. And those who have such contact. Just a little appreciation. Yesterday evening, the verse was speaking about the Supreme Lord. Bhishma Deva was speaking of the Supreme Lord. In addition to creating the material world, sometimes he comes. And the sometimes he comes, a purpose is the give association to the sattvatas. And by giving association to the sattvatas, they become fully cleansed. And he mentions the personality of Godhead that appears, maybe Krishna, maybe Lord Chaitanya, of course so many other incarnations of the Lord. And the unique position, this is not specific to this morning's verse, but just our life as devotees, we have a special appreciation for Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, because Namo Mahabhadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namani Gauratrishye Namaha. He gives Krishna Prema, or even more specifically, love for Krishna as found in Vrindavan. Braja Prema, that's the special gift of Lord Chaitanya. So how is one to receive that gift of Lord Chaitanya? One receives the gift of Lord Chaitanya through the representatives of Lord Chaitanya. That's how he conducted his Leela. He gave us association, for example, to Rupa and Sanatan, and the 5 of the 6 Goswamis. He gave direct association, extensive direct association. Raghunath Bhatta, Gopal Bhatta, Rupa and Sanatan. He gave his direct association to them, Raghunath Das Goswami. He gave his direct association to them. And then he instructed them to associate with one another in Vrindavan. He empowered them to write books about love of Krishna in Vrindavan. And he assigned Jiva Goswami to study, well, it was arranged by Lord Nityananda for Jiva Goswami to study under Rupa Goswami. And the 6 Goswamis gave profuse opportunity for subsequent generations to receive the gift of Lord Chaitanya. They're very special persons for us. I mean, not only because they're on every altar, ISKCON home or ISKCON temple altar. Their special position is they're the givers of the gift of Lord Chaitanya. The gift of Lord Chaitanya is Krishna Prema in the mood of the resident of Vrindavan. So the connection with this verse is the bhāgavata-saṅgataḥ, or we can say sadhu sangha, but bhāgavata-saṅgataḥ, and specifically the gift of Lord Chaitanya through the representatives, the Bhagavatas, the book, and the devotee, Bhagavata. And they're empowered, and they're very liberal. They give Lord Chaitanya's gift. And then those in connection with Lord Chaitanya, just like on the altar, on the right side is 6 Goswamis, and the most current disciplic succession, taking the teachings of the 6 Goswamis and making them available to us. Now, Gaura Das Babaji didn't write, but he realized, and he sat at the feet of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who wrote profusely, and Bhaktisiddhanta, following his father, wrote profusely and lectured profusely, and set the example and passed that on to our founder Acharya. Then in turn, in Srila Prabhupada's absence, our assignment, our service is what he asked us to do, to assist in disseminating the knowledge of the cyclic succession, disseminating the mercy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, disseminating Braja Prema or Braja Bhakti. And that's the means by which these, Prabhupada is spending ample time. The demigod worshippers, because that's the previous verse, but he's not skipping a beat, several times. Or the other authorities, people that are scientific or modern scientific people, they don't accept the Vedas, they accept the scientist. So whatever the scientist can give, or whatever the worshippers of the demigods can give, they both can become elevated. And Prabhupada's very kind. He continued to help cut the blind faith and affinity that modern society has in science. Just a little Prabhupada story. It's in relation to this repetition of science and demigod worship. And the incompleteness, they'll never be able to solve the problems of life. But faith in either of the two can be an obstacle. And in modern times, the greater of the two obstacles is the faith in modern science. Just when Srila Prabhupada made available Canto 5, it shook the whole of ISKCON in many different ways, because it was so puzzling, Vedic cosmology. And so many ways Prabhupada was taking swipes at the scientists that can't understand lots of things, and at the same time they didn't go to the moon and all those things. So there was when he came to visit New York, and from visiting New York he went to Toronto and went a westerly direction. And the devotees that were traveling with him were asking, a million questions, particularly his local entourage, the secretary and personal servant and the other people that were Pradumna and others that were traveling with him. And questions and questions and questions. And one of the things that Prabhupada said is that he took such a strong position deliberately because he wanted to shake the blind faith that people have in modern science. So he was strong. Like, normally he is strong, but he was like super strong. Purposefully, because he said he saw the blind faith that people have in modern science to be the greatest obstacle in spreading Krishna consciousness broadly. Because, science says this and the Vedas say that. And if it doesn't match what science says, then I don't know if I believe it. And a number of devotees not only became shaken, their faith became shaken. Some number of devotees, I don't know what the count is, but they just left because of that intense faith in science, empirical science. Although certainly being able to accept the fallibility of senses, the four defects of conditioned souls. Acknowledging in concept or in principle the four defects of conditioned souls. But when Vedic statements were so strong and presented in such a strong manner, it was in contradiction, like in the face of modern science. People were really shaken. He wanted it. Like, it took us by the heels and turned us upside down and shook us, or his readers. Now, I don't know what that impact is having currently. I know what it was when it came out. And purposefully. So here, many, many, many times, here in this purport several times, and in his lectures again and again, he would say, in support of Vedic conclusions, that this is scientific. And then he would turn around and challenge the scientists. Scientific, here's one. I was just listening this morning. Prabhupada was giving a Bhagavad Gita class on the verses that follow Brahmarpanam, Brahmahavir, Brahma now, Brahma nahutam, the different ways of sacrifice. And he was explaining the sacrifice, one of the options of sacrifice, some like this, some like that, some like the other, where they sacrifice the senses into the fire of yajna. So then he explained that fire of yajna means Vishnu, and when the senses, the yogis, engage in the Ashtanga yoga system, that's what it indicates. Offering their senses in the fire of sacrifice. Doesn't mean they toss their limbs into a fire. It's the meditation process or the Ashtanga yoga process. And then he said, according to Ashtanga yoga, there's, according to Ayurveda, part of the aging when muscles become slackened has to do with air being not properly aligned. So yogis that live long life, one important way of extending longevity is they do yoga, and with the yoga, of course, pranayama, and it's just one of the, but it promotes proper circulation of the air, and then the muscles don't become slackened, and so they have a longer duration of life. That's mechanical. It doesn't mean they live permanently. But so then he said, this is scientific. I was noting, this is scientific. And then, turn around and he's bashing the scientists. But it's Vedic science, and the Vedic science is not only on the physical side, but certainly on the metaphysical side or transcendental side. And it's, right in the purport, modern people don't have any faith in God or demigods. It's all rubbish. They have faith in science. And it's, he knew his audience, and yet he would confront that audience again and again and again, strongly, purposely. That's a part of a mission that he accepted for himself, following the line of Bhaktisiddhanta. Now, Bhaktisiddhanta was far more intense. Prabhupada said about himself, I'm 90% more lenient than my Guru Maharaj. And his Guru Maharaj was Nrsimha Guru. People that had different views would run the other way because he was so intense. And he didn't relent. Why? It was just not like a grumpy sadhu or something. People their attachment to finding enjoyment in the material world has so many different methods. Wherever it's like water, and there's a little leak in something, and the water goes. And it goes in there's so many holes in the material bucket. So he was strong. And a big for, again, modern, is science. And science, by its very nature, cannot know transcendence. By using senses and the reasoning faculty, both of which are imperfect. Making mistakes in senses that are imperfect. And that's science. They can know something, it's fine. We give credit for knowing something. We give credit for being inquisitive, that's fine. And the benefit or perfection of that inquisitiveness is coming in contact with a pure devotee. And coming in contact with the pure devotee includes being inspired to engage in devotional service. So, consequently, Srila Prabhupada made an effort in the course of his travels to have government people or persons having some post, or professors having some post, to interact with the pure devotee, because those persons have followers. And if the leaders can be influenced in the direction of bhakti, then the followers will be influenced in the direction of bhakti. And that way reach many people without even dealing with the many people, by dealing with the leaders of those people. There's a long list for Bhaktisiddhanta. I've not seen a list of who Prabhupada met, but who Bhaktisiddhanta met. It's a long list. Long list. And, some didn't like how strong he was. Some really liked how strong he was. But he didn't relent. But the unrelenting nature was, he wanted to cut the affinity for illusion. He was already situated in transcendence. So let's get back to the Bhagavatam it's Shukadeva Goswami is in that position of transcendence. He's been asked by Maharaj Parikshit these two questions. What is that subject matter that should be always heard, chanted, and remembered? Shrotavya kirtitavyascha dhyaya pujascha nityada. Dhyaya pujas cha nityada. So it's the personality of Godhead, but hearing about the personality of Godhead from the right source. Hearing about the personality of Godhead from a pure devotee, or the bhāgavata-saṅgataḥ. The bhāgavata-saṅgataḥ, by definition, is one who is like sadhu sangha, same elsewhere in Kapila Dev's emphasis on sadhu sangha. Long section. Something I've learned from Dravida Prabhu, who likes the Bhagavatam, and he likes certain sections of the Bhagavatam, so I learned from him. There's a section of Kapila Dev's teachings in chapter 25 that he calls, apparently others have called it, Sadhu Sangastaka. And, Dravida, he likes to sing or poeticize. So he would cite the sloka and have people clap their hands and recite the sloka with him. And then he would poeticize the sloka and then explain the poeticized sloka. He's a very fun person to be with. Very charming speaker. But there's a lot of emphasis in Kapila Dev's teaching on the importance of sadhu sangha. That the circumstance in that section, Devahuti is feeling a lot of separation from Kardama Muni because he's left. They were together for how long? 10,000 years, something. They were attached. She was attached. And sure enough, he wasn't. So to teach by example, Kardama Muni requested his son, knowing he's the personality of Godhead, with folded palms, please may I go to the forest and continue my meditation. Meditate upon what? Meditate upon the personality of Godhead, who is his son. But to show by example, he went back to the forest. Poor Devahuti, she's feeling separation from Kardama Muni. And she knows that her son, Kapila Dev, isn't going to stick around. So now what? So how do I prepare myself for when you're gone? Because my husband's gone and I'm feeling what I'm feeling. And I know that you're not going to be around for too long either. So how do I get to that place where I'm attached to the personality of Godhead? Very good question. Sadhu Sangha. And then he elaborates. So the definition of a sadhu is very similar to the definition of a bhagavata. Little sloka question. Who knows the verse? The qualities of a sadhu verse from Kapila Dev's teachings. Titikshava Karunika. You like slokas? No? Your daughter would know. Titikshava Karunika. Someone look it up in your handheld device. Titikshava Karunika. I'm not remembering either. Say it slowly. Surada Sarvadehinam Ajatra Shatavat Shanta Sadhava Sadhabhushan. So that by association with such persons, one can become like such persons. And the way to associate with such persons, of course, is hearing and rendering service, living your life according to that which you have heard. Read it again. One more time. Okay. So, through association of such sadhus or bhagavatas, then whatever the position, because the previous message was through tīvra bhakti, one can go beyond affinity for a particular demigod and come to the exclusive affinity for the personality of Godhead. So to get that tīvra bhakti is the association of sadhus or bhāgavata-saṅgataḥ. Whatever the origin is, because something like, very similar to the teaching of Lord Chaitanya to Sanatana Goswami, really nice section. Sanatana Goswami was asking Kayami, what am I? Not who am I, but what am I? And why am I suffering? Most people don't ask why, they just want to diminish the suffering. But why is the suffering to begin with? Why? Lord Chaitanya appreciates his question and then starts describing I call it the pyramid. There's all living entities are parts and parcels of the Supreme. And then he starts going up the pyramid. Some living entities become human, and some living entities are human, become civilized humans. And some living entities become civilized entities. So he just keeps going up and comes to the position of the devotee, and then the pure devotee. And so then he says the same thing. It's this association with the pure devotee that it brings one to the stage of perfection. Who we are, we're eternal servants of Krishna, but covered. And then to remove the covering, it requires this position of associating with a sadhu, then when a bhakta, a pure devotee, and then one can engage in bhakti in many, many verses. And then he says, Lord Chaitanya says, that even in the stage of perfection, at the highest stages of bhakti, association is essential. How important is, it's another way of saying what's in the Bhagavatam. Or the teachings of Lord Chaitanya are the teachings of Srimad Bhagavatam, the teachings of Srimad Bhagavatam, the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. There's no difference. And those who are followers of Lord Chaitanya, they inconvenience themselves in many, many, many ways, unlimited ways, to give the teachings of Srimad Bhagavatam or the teachings of Lord Chaitanya to the public. Even they don't want it. The thankless task. Creating enemies, Prabhupada said. You preach and you create enemies because people don't want. No, obviously some people want. But their wanting is not necessarily so strong. Occasionally we meet somebody that really wants, which is fantastic. But what about all the other people that don't really want? At least they don't, and some even are inimical. We smile and we go on preaching anyways. Or at least distributing books and distributing prasadam and distributing the holy name and distributing in general the lifestyle of bhakti because it's good for people. And then gradually, there's some benefit that comes to those people, and some may take to the bhakti process, and we just continue receiving that mercy of Lord Chaitanya through this same method, hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, propagating the message of Srimad Bhagavatam, living our lives accordingly, becoming exclusively dedicated to Krishna in the course of our existence in variegated positions of life, and continue to give and give and give till the last breath. So let's see if there's some discussion. It's 23 minutes after 8. Nice, it's a clock that reads the right time. Fantastic. Must be done in Jaya Pandit's fixing the clock.
So this is in relation to the point you said that coming in contact with pure devotees means it also includes engaging in pure devotional service. Engaging in the devotional service.
That's devotional service. He's engaging. Tell me what I said again. I don't think you said what I said.
Coming in contact with a pure devotee, which also includes engaging in the devotional service, taking the association.
Okay.
Means. So recently I'm finding myself not able to go with the interactive model of preaching.
Interactive model of preaching. What do you mean by that?
So recently I took TTC, and the way the method they were encouraging is to do an interactive model, like speakers interact with the students, giving exercises and so on. I'm not a fan of that model. So that's where I want to trying to get clarified, because my thought is that when we are taking association, naturally we feel we take up some application or something like that. Like instead of this, I'm finding like this like a new model.
I got your question.
Yeah, so I want to ask you comments or educate me a little bit. We are not used to this, the classes are not used to that.
I get the idea. Your question is really open-ended, like, can I speak something about it? So I'll speak something about it. It's a model. And it's not like you fail if you don't use that model. Did Prabhupada use that model? I'm not aware that Prabhupada used that model. But the teacher training course is teaching that model. Now why are they teaching that model if Prabhupada didn't do it? Are they deviating from our founder Acharya? Are they heading for a garbage can? Or why are they teaching a model that our founder Acharya didn't use? At least to my knowledge. Well, there's a reason, and the reason is it helps because people don't understand how to apply. It stays theoretical at best, and not as much application, because application is necessary. So it's priming the pump of application. That's why they teach it. Now, supposing there's a fellow like you that says, I'm not a fan of this. So you're not disqualified to be a teacher. It has its place. There's a purpose. And you probably, I'm guessing, probably you'll find a way, at least from time to time, that the application model that you're not a fan of, you'll find it useful and you'll find ways to do it. It's not like there's only one model. And if you don't do that model, you can't teach. You get an F in your report card. You can't teach. There's a purpose, and when you understand the purpose, then that will help you feel a little, less comfortable with a model you're not a fan of.
And there's also concern because that's the only model that was taught.
That's okay. You're repeating. Get comfortable again. Someone else? Behind you?
Hare Krishna Maharaj. I have a maybe it's a comment for today, and then I have a question from yesterday's class. If that's okay.
You were out in the hall. I didn't even know you were there.
Sorry.
You're out by the shoes or something.
Oh, I mean,
I couldn't see you at least.
Sorry, I mean yesterday morning's class.
Oh, yesterday morning class.
Yes.
Okay. Comment.
The comment is that when I was writing my dissertation and I had to kind of go through the Bhagavatam in a bit of an academic way, one thing that I observed, and I didn't write down the numbers at that time, but the most common, most repeated method prescribed in the Bhagavatam for freedom from bondage, just in terms of the number of times, was association with the Mahatma. So you're mentioning about this section about Karda Muni like that, but so it was like my topic was on Maya, and so the next question was, well, how do you get free from Maya? What's the Bhagavatam's prescription to become free from Maya? And just like again and again, from beginning to end, I don't know, more than 1,000 times, it mentions in different places that association with the Mahatma, which I just thought was a little amazing, because it's just repeated so many times.
He would modify the language ever so slightly, but the theme was the same. Here's a comment on your comment. I was listening to a class, recorded class, Prabhupada was giving at Hyderabad. And he did one of the things during that class that he would oftentimes do. There were a number of American European devotees traveling with him. So he said to the audience, you see these, and you would appreciate how they become nice Vaishnavas. And he said, I repeat the same messages again and again. And I repeat the same messages again and again. And I repeat the same messages again and again. And slowly they start to understand and live by those messages. And that was a method that he used. He didn't tire of saying it again and again. Even to the same audience, what to speak of new audiences. So repetition was helpful so that it could go in. So now that's a comment on your comment.
My question was, since from yesterday, is that, and we've been talking about this now a few classes, the compassion of Maharaj Yudhishthira, and sometimes there's a sort of a conflict in compassion. Like he is so compassionate to Duryodhana, but then Bhishma and Vidura, they're suffering in the sort of they're tolerating Duryodhana in the kingdom, and then there's also Draupadi and also the lady, the Gandharva lady who Duryodhana assaulted. So as a devotee, one has to be compassionate, and then you mentioned how this is the heart of it. This is the essence of a devotee, is compassion. But it seems sometimes there's, to whom compassion? He's being compassionate to Duryodhana, but then apparently causing distress to perhaps how many people, because a demon is being again allowed to rule or live.
Being honored.
Yeah.
Well, Here's the trump card. Yudhisthira just did what Krishna wanted. So what did Krishna want? He didn't want to bring distress to Bhima or others who may have been distressed by his compassion. You know, why did Yudhisthira gamble Draupadi? That's bad. What to speak of the consequence of that? But he's moving according to Krishna's indication from within, because that was his disposition, and Krishna was moving him on his chessboard, or moving him in appropriate manners to suit his pastimes. And yet, it's important to remember that. One example that comes to mind is, it's responding to your question. Why, when Muchukunda was met by Krishna in the cave, Krishna could have done all kinds of XYZ things. But he said, you have to purify yourself for the animals that you killed, and you're going to have to take birth again. And in your next birth, after the end of your next birth, you'll come back to me. Now, Krishna could have just taken him back to him, to the spiritual world. So why didn't he? Because there was some service, some plan. And he didn't spell out what the plan was, what that service is, not even indicated. But Krishna can do what he likes. And the pure devotees are those who do what Krishna likes. So why would Krishna now put the onus on Krishna, or the fault on Krishna or something? The improper. Why would a pure devotee do something that's compassionate to some and others are inconvenienced or made to suffer? Why would a pure devotee do that? Well, it looks like deferential compassion. And deferential compassion leads to suffering from some others, and kindness received by some others. So again, we can't. We're not pure devotees, but we can take a look at the actions of pure devotees and understand. Same point. They're acting under Krishna's internal potency for some purpose. So now what do we do? The real good question is, what do we do when there's an opportunity for compassion, and when we exhibit some compassion, then some are going to be relieved and some others are going to suffer when we're trying to be compassionate? That's the more difficult question. So how right conduct should be decided, there's initially, minimally, some responsibility to become conversant in Scripture. Because in Scripture, we find example-setting persons, particularly the Mahajans, example-setting persons, who show the way of proper conduct. Mahajano yena kata sapanta. But every situation, we're not going to find an exact fit, because there's so many considerations in practical life. There's something like this, but there's something that's not like this. Therefore, practically speaking, it'd be reasonable to say when compassion is extended over here, then some people are going to suffer over there. What to do? What to do? And it's not easy, because you go over this way, some are going to suffer. You go over that way, some others are going to suffer. So one could say it's part of the territory. So then one's responsibility, back to Yudhishthira, is he was honoring, as much as Duryodhana was bad, he was honoring him. In part, he was honoring him because he's a relative. Well, he's a relative, but he's a demon. Why did Prahlad honor his father? He was a demon. He got his. So when he got his, please deliver him. And, who's going to suffer if he gets delivered? He's going to take birth again and do some more dirty business. But relieve him of the reactions of his misdeeds doesn't mean it takes away the tendency for more misdeeds without giving pure bhakti. So anything you do is going to have some implication with kindness to some and difficulty for others. So we search super soul, in indication, and become knowledgeable in scripture, and trust that Krishna will guide us, and we take responsibility for whatever the outcome is. In Bhishma Dev's, back to chapter 9, Bhishma Dev's saying there are three considerations, and if those three considerations are met, don't worry. Theistic conduct under the guidance of Brahmanas and Vaishnavas for the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord. Then don't worry. So that comes back to, Krishna, some indication from, at least from Super Soul within Yudhishthira, this is the kind of compassion you should render. Compassion to Duryodhana. There was some purpose. For a pure devotee, they can understand Krishna's purpose better than the rest of us. But those three principles. Anything else? You usually have a question. You got a question this morning? I thought so.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. So the question that I have here is, what is the best way of serving Grantharaj Bhagavatam? I mean,
What's the best way of serving Grantharaj Bhagavatam?
Yeah.
What's your understanding? What's the best way of serving Grantharaj Bhagavatam?
Reading it, discussing with devotees, distributing it. Is there some other way?
Well, you here, you first comes receiving. Service starts with tadvidhi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya. That's the method. So with submission, then you're eager to receive the message of the Bhagavatam. And when you receive the message of the Bhagavatam, you apply it. That's sevaya, to the person and the book. That's the best service. It starts with wanting to know, tadvidhi, and I want to know. So I'm going to the Bhagavatam. Before I begin reading Bhagavatam, I want to know the absolute truth. I want to know my relationship with Krishna. I want to become closer to Krishna. The Bhagavatam is going to give me that. Pranipat, prashna, seva, and then distribute it to others. So live your life according to, but you live your life comes because you've heard. You've heard with a heart that's eager to receive. And then you live. And then you feel cleansed and feel uplifted. And then you wish, because of that, to share that with others. That's bhagavata-saṅgataḥ.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Something? Okay.
Maharaj, I'm trying to understand the difference between the association of pure devotees and association of sadhu sangha.
Why are you seeing a difference? There's different terms. Can they mean the same thing?
No, but I'm trying to understand the pure devotees meaning like.
I'm not sure what your question is. Is your question, is there like a barometer or a bell starts to ring when a sadhu becomes a pure devotee, and then there's less than a pure devotee, and then there's sadhus that are less than a pure devotee? Is that what you're asking?
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
Yeah.
Well, what's a sadhu? And we have the definition, and then there's degrees of sadhu-ness, and so we associate with sadhus, and we recognize amongst sadhus some are super excellent or most elevated. So we have regard for all living entities. It's the same status that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu described to Sanatana Goswami, and so there's degrees. We respect and serve and hear from and take the association of all sadhus. And amongst all sadhus, there may be one or some who you feel is closest to the position of unalloyed devotion. And special regard goes to such persons. There's not a meter that you hook up to sadhu, and now they qualify for being considered as pure devotee. Be very careful about doing something like that. I'm trying to recall the specific circumstance, but I recall hearing Prabhupada being asked, how do we identify a pure devotee? Which is kind of what your question is. And his answer was, I know the context. That the context was Prabhupada staying at the home, the residence of John Lennon, and they were having discussion on Prabhupada's translation of Bhagavad Gita, and why should I read your translation of Bhagavad Gita? It was very direct. And he asked the same question again multiple times. You kept coming back to that question, The Prabhupada's answer was, when you find someone that they're always serving Krishna, they're always speaking about Krishna, their whole life is simply Krishna, Krishna, Krishna. That's the person who you should hear from. That's pure devotee. That was the very simple way of describing. That's a pure devotee. Then you or somebody might say, well, there's perfect more perfect, most perfect. That you can also do. But pure devotee, amongst those who are devoted or elevated in devotion, it's in modern language, 24/7. There's nothing in their life but Krishna. That's a pure devotee. Okay. Now one can say sadhu. That's a sadhu. Okay. The terms can be interchangeable, not distinct. I think we'll end there. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.